There is a particular silence a great hall makes when it is deciding whether to destroy you, and I was standing in the centre of it with a child's hand locked in mine and the broken bond burning a hole through my chest like a coal. The boy would not let go. That was the thing I could not get past. Even then, even with 100 wolves staring and a woman's voice ringing off the rafters calling me a liar and worse. He was 4 years old, and he had decided I was his, and he held on while the floor of my whole life dropped away. "Say it again," the woman said, sweet as poison. "Tell them all what you are." I could feel the king's eyes on me from the dais. I did not look at him. If I looked at him, I would lose the thread, and I had exactly one chance to say the true thing in the right order, and the bond pain was making the torches swim. I lifted my chin. I opened my mouth. It started a season before that. On the night, my own mate stood up in front of everyone I had ever known and threw me away like a cracked cup. I am Maren, I set bones, and I bring down fevers, and I have sat with more of this pack's dying than anyone living, and for 23 years that had been enough to make me invisible. Which is what I wanted. Healers are useful the way a doorframe is useful. No one thanks the doorframe. No one looks at it twice. I had built a quiet life out of being looked past, and I had told myself, the way you tell yourself things at the bottom of winter, that quiet and safe were the same word. His name was Garrick. My mate, fated, bonded, the wolf in me having decided the matter 2 years before my good sense was consulted. He was a ranked warrior with a strong jaw and a stronger sense of his own future, and from the first he had treated the bond between us like a debt someone else had run up in his name. I knew he was ashamed of me. A healer's apprentice with herb-stained hands is not the mate an ambitious wolf dreams of. I had made my peace with the cold of him, the way I made peace with most cold. I kept the fire low, and I did not ask for more. I should have asked for more. I know that now. But this is the story as it happened, and on the night it happened, I still thought smallness was a kind of armour. It was the autumn gathering at Greymark, the great stone hall of the Iron Territories, where the whole pack came in under one roof before the snows. Long fires, roasting meat, the high table on its dais, and on the dais the empty chair. You should know about the chair, because it matters later. At the king's right hand sat a chair no one used. Carved, beautiful, draped in grey. The Luna's seat. Our king's mate had died 4 winters past, in fever, and he had never filled the chair and never let it be moved. And the whole pack had learned not to look at it the way you learn not to look at a scar on a proud man's face. I had set healing draughts in that hall 12 times, and I had never once seen the king sit beside that chair without his hand resting a moment on its arm, as if checking it was still there. I was carrying a fever tincture to the steward's wife when Garrick stood up. He had drunk enough to be loud and not enough to be forgiven for it. He climbed onto the bench so the whole hall could see him, and he said my name, not kindly, the way you say a name when you have decided to make it into a joke, and the hall turned. "Maren," he said again, savouring it. "My mate. The pack healer." He smiled around at them all. "I reject the bond, here, in front of all of you, so there's no mistaking it. I'll not be chained to a stillroom drudge with dirt under her nails and nothing to her name." He spread his arms to the laughter he was sure was coming. "Go on then. Go home and cry to your herbs. Who'd take you now? Where would you even go?" The bond severed in that moment the way a green branch breaks. Not clean. All splinters. A white tearing pain that drove the air out of me where I stood. The law is true, by the way. I had set the bones of the rejected before, and never understood until that night that the pain is real, physical, a wound with no edge to bind. I gripped the back of a chair so I would not go down. Some of them did laugh. Garrick basked in it. He was already turning to a girl 2 ranks above me. Already done with me. Certain, and this is the part I want you to hold on to, certain that I had nowhere to go and no one to turn to, and that this was therefore safe. I did not cry to my herbs. I did not say one word. I set the steward's wife's tincture down on the table, very carefully, because my hands were shaking and I did not want to drop it. And then I straightened my back and I walked the entire length of that hall in the ringing quiet, past every face I had ever healed, and I went out through the great doors into the cold. I did not look at the dice. So I did not see, until much later, that the king had been standing at the very back of his own hall the whole time, in the shadow past the last fire, watching every second of it. I learned what he had decided at dawn, because at dawn his second-in-command came to my door. Osric was a broad, careful man with grey at his temples, who had never in my life had cause to speak to me. He filled my doorway the way a closed gate does. Behind him stood 2 warriors, and behind them the sky was going pink over the pines, and my first cold thought was that Garrick's family had decided a rejected mate was an embarrassment best sent away quietly. "The king wants you," Osric said. Then, because something in my face must have moved, he added, gruff, "Not like that. Bring nothing you can't carry." I want to be honest about what I felt walking up to that hall in the grey light, because it was not hope. I had spent a whole night with a hole torn in my chest, and I had no more illusions about what powerful wolves wanted from a healer with stained hands. I went because a king's summons is not a thing you decline, and I went deciding that whatever he offered or demanded, I would meet it on my own feet. He was alone in the hall when I came in. No court, just the king and the long cold fires burned down to embers and the empty grey chair beside him. He looked older up close than he did from across a room. The king, Torvald, though no one below the high ranks said the name to his face, was tall and dark-bearded and tired in a way that had set into the bone. He looked at me for a long moment, and I made myself look back. And I waited. "Last night," he said, "a wolf of mine threw away his mate in my hall, in front of my pack, and laughed about it." His voice was low and even. "I do not allow my people to be unmade for sport. It reflects on me. It tells every pack watching that the iron territories let the strong humiliate the weak for the pleasure of a haul." His jaw tightened. "I will not have it said of me." "So this is about your name," I said. It came out steadier than I felt. "Not mine." Something flickered behind his eyes. He did not deny it. "I am offering you 2 things," he said, "and you will choose. There is a horse saddled in the yard, and gold enough to start again wherever you like, the southern packs, the free towns, anywhere beyond the reach of what was done to you here. Take it, and go with my protection on the road, and no one will follow. That is the first thing." He paused, and his hand found the arm of the grey chair the way it always did, without his seeming to know it did. "Or you stay, under my claim. Not as a wife, as a woman of this hall under the king's word, untouchable, beyond Garrick, beyond his family, beyond any wolf who thinks a rejected mate is fair game. You would owe me nothing. But you would be mine to protect, and they would all know it by midday." I stood there in the cold hall and understood that he was handing me a stillroom drudge, with dirt under her nails, an actual choice, the first real one anyone had offered me in years. "Why," I said, "would a king spend his claim on a healer he has never spoken to?" "Because it is the right thing," he said, "and I am short of those lately," and he would say no more. I should have taken the horse. Any sensible woman with a hole torn in her chest takes the horse and the gold and the open road and never looks back. I have asked myself 100 times why I didn't, and the truest answer I have is the one I'm least proud of. I was done being sent away. Garrick had sent me away with a laugh. I would not also send myself. "I'll stay," I said. He nodded once, like a man closing a ledger. He did not smile. He stood, and he spoke a formal word over me that made the air prickle. A king's claim of protection. Old as the pack. A thing that cannot be taken back lightly. And he was careful, I noticed, to keep 2 full paces between us the whole time, as if the claim were a document he was signing, and not a thing that touched either of us at all. That should have been the end of my part in his life. A claim. A word. A healer kept safe in a wing of the hall, the king going back to his grief and his empty chair, and forgetting I existed. Then his son found me. I did not even know the king had a son. The boy was 4, dark-haired like his father, and he had been motherless since the fever winter, raised by nurses in the high rooms and brought down to the hall only on feast days like a small solemn ornament. His name was Leaf. I was in the stillroom they had given me, 3 days into my strange new safety, grinding willow bark out of pure habit because idle hands frighten me, when a small person walked in without knocking and stood watching me work with the unblinking gravity only very small children and very old men possess. "You're the one my father kept," he said. "I suppose I am." He considered this. Then he climbed onto the bench beside me, uninvited, and watched my hands, and after a while he reached out and very seriously moved the bowl an inch to the left, as though it had been bothering him from across the room, and I let him. And that was that. He came back the next day. And the next. No one had told him healers were invisible. No one had told him I was a charity case the king had taken on to save his own reputation. He just decided I was interesting, and then he decided I was his, the way children do, all at once and without appeal. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself a great many things that season that turned out to be wrong. If you've come this far with me, stay, because what that little boy did in front of the whole pack a month later, and what I found out about why the king really kept me, turned everything I've told you so far inside out. I thought I was a debt a proud king paid to protect his own name. I was about to learn I was something he had been quietly looking for 4 years, without ever knowing my name. Follow moon and iron so the thread doesn't break. The empty chair, the boy, and the night I finally understood why a grieving king spent his claim on a stranger. Now let me tell you about the woman who had been watching all of it. Her name was Lady Astrid, and she had come to Greymark to be Luna. I should have seen her sooner. She was highborn, from a strong pack to the east, beautiful and clever and patient, and she had spent 2 years making herself indispensable to the king's court, managing his feasts, charming his advisors, sitting near the high table at every gathering, with the serene confidence of a woman who has decided that the empty grey chair is, eventually, hers. She had been kind to me. At first. That should have warned me. Powerful people are rarely kind to door frames without a reason. "You poor thing," she said to me once, in a corridor, her voice all warmth and her eyes all winter. Taken in out of pity, and now the child won't leave you alone. People are starting to talk, you know. They say you've worked your way into the king's grief through his son. They say a clever stillroom girl knows exactly what she's doing. She touched my arm. I'd be careful. Pity curdles so quickly into suspicion. It would be a shame if you had to leave us after all. I went back to my stillroom, and I sat down and I thought, with the small cold clarity that has carried me through most of my life, she is going to hurt me. And she is cleverer than Garrick. And she is not finished. The thing about being a healer is that people talk in front of you the way they talk in front of furniture. That is how I started to put it together. A word here, a closed door there, a serving girl's idle gossip about Lady Astrid's generosity to a certain ambitious warrior. It took me 3 weeks to find the shape of it, and when I found it, I sat very still for a long time. Garrick had not thrown me away on a drunken whim. He had been paid to. Lady Astrid had gone to him quietly and offered him what he wanted most, a match 2 ranks above me, her patronage, a future, in exchange for one thing, that he break with me publicly, humiliatingly, completely, at the autumn gathering where the king would see. She had not done it to free Garrick. She had done it to remove me. Because Lady Astrid, who missed nothing, had seen what I had not, and what the king himself did not yet know. She had watched the king's eyes find the pack healer across his hall, more than once, over more than one winter, and linger a half-beat too long, and she had decided to destroy the rival before the king ever realized he had one. The humiliation was never about Garrick's pride. It was a blade aimed at me, thrown by a woman who understood the king's heart better than the king did. And I understood, sitting there in the cold, that walking out of that hall with my chin up had not ended it. It had started it. Something in me changed that night. And it did not change back. I had spent 23 years being looked past and calling it peace. I was done. Garrick had laughed and asked where I would even go, and Lady Astrid had stroked my arm and told me to be careful, and they had both made the same mistake, which was to be certain I would fold. I sat there in my stillroom, and I felt the last of the soft, frightened thing in me go hard and clear as ice on stone, and I said, to the empty room, in a voice I had not used before, "No, not this time. Let her come." I stopped flinching in corridors. I stopped lowering my eyes. And the next time Lady Astrid came to curdle pity into suspicion, she found a different woman waiting. And I watched her notice it, and I watched it trouble her. I learnt the king's secret by accident, which is the only way I ever learn anything that matters. Little Leaf had a fever, a real one, sharp and sudden, the kind that had taken his mother, and the whole high household lost its head. And they sent for me, because by then there was no one the boy would let near him but me. I sat with him 2 nights running, cooling him, coaxing willow bark and honey into him, singing the flat, tuneless songs that are all I have. And on the 2nd night the king came and sat across the small bed from me and watched his son breathe, and somewhere in the grey hour before dawn, half to himself, he began to talk. "The last time I sat up like this," he said, "it was her. My Luna, the fever took her in 3 days, and there was nothing any healer could do. And I sat where you're sitting, and I held her hand, and I was useless." His thumb moved over the back of his son's small wrist. There was one healer who would not leave. The others gave up. They could see it was hopeless, and they had other sick to tend, and they were right to go. But there was a young one, an apprentice, who stayed the whole last night. She did not pretend she could save her. She just stayed, so my Luna would not go into the dark with no hand but mine to hold. He shook his head slowly. I never learned her name. The hall was chaos, and then it was grief, and by the time I thought to ask, no one could tell me which apprentice it had been. I have wondered about her for 4 years. The one kind thing in the worst night of my life, and I could not even thank her. I sat very still. Because I remembered that night. Of course I remembered that night. I had been 16, terrified, certain I would be punished for failing, and I had stayed because I could not make my feet carry me out of the room of a dying woman whose hand had gone cold by degrees in mine. I had never told a soul. I had not thought the king, drowning in his grief, had even known I was there. "It was me," I said. He looked up, and I watched the king of the Iron Territories understand, 4 years late, who he had claimed at dawn, not a stranger he had pitied for the sake of his own name, but the one person who had been kind to him in the dark when kindness could not even help. He had not known it when he claimed me. He had only known there was something about the healer his pack had thrown away that he could not walk past. His wolf had known the rest, the way wolves do, and had been quietly steering him toward me for a season, while his grief told him he felt nothing at all. That is why he keeps, the king said. Very low, the boy. The wolf. Me, he stopped. His hand had gone still on his son's wrist. I told myself it was honor. I am a poor liar to myself, it turns out. He did not reach for me. He kept his careful 2 paces even then, with the fevered child between us and the truth finally in the open. But he looked at me across that small bed, as if I were the first warm thing he had let himself see in 4 winters, and I felt the held space between us like a weight neither of us was willing to set down. And the boy's fever broke just before dawn, and none of us said anything more. We did not need to. Some doors, once they are open, do not have to be walked through that same night. Lady Astrid made her move at the next full gathering, and she made it the way clever people do, by turning my strength into the weapon against me. The hall was full. The king on the dais, the grey chair beside him, the whole pack-in under the rafters. And Lady Astrid rose, gracious and grave, and addressed the king with the practised sorrow of a woman who only wants what is best. My king, I speak because no one else will, out of love for this pack. She turned, so the whole hall was her audience. A rejected healer is taken in out of mercy, and within a season she has the king's heir, clinging to her skirts, the king sitting up nights at her side, the whole court whispering. We have all seen it. How does a stillroom girl, thrown away by her own mate, climb so fast into a grieving king's household? She let the question hang, ugly and shapeless, the kind that cannot be answered because it was never meant to be. I say she has preyed on your grief and your son's loneliness. I say she is not a victim. I say she is the most dangerous kind of climber, the patient kind, and I say the pack deserves to know what she truly is, before she sits in a chair she has no right to. It was beautifully done. I will give her that to the end of my days. She had taken every true thing. The boy who loved me, the nights at the fever bed, the king who could not walk past me, and bent them all into proof of a crime. The hall began to murmur, and the murmur had teeth, and I felt it turn toward me the way a cold wind turns. And the king began to rise, his face going dangerous, ready to bring the whole weight of his word down to shield me. I put my hand on the table, and I stood first. No, I said, to him, quietly, just for him, not this time. Let me, because I had spent my whole life being spoken for, sent away, decided about by other people in rooms I was not even standing in. And I understood, with the torches swimming and the broken bond aching in my chest the way it still did when I was frightened, that if the king rescued me here, I would be exactly what Astrid said I was, a woman who climbed on the strength of his protection. The only way to answer her was to need no protection at all. So I stood in the centre of that hall in the ringing quiet, and the boy slipped down off the dice and crossed the whole floor before anyone could stop him, and put his hand in mine and held on, 4 years old and certain, in front of all of them, and I felt the bond pain flare white, and I held it, and I held him, and I lifted my chin. Lady Astrid asks how a thrown-away healer climbed so fast. My voice came out clear. I'll tell the hall exactly how. The same night Garrick rejected me for sport, he came into a sum he had no way to earn, a patron, a match 2 ranks above him, a future bought and paid for. I did not look at Garrick, gone grey at his bench. Ask him who paid him. Ask him whose generosity bought my humiliation, and why a great lady would spend so much gold to remove one stillroom healer from a hall. Now I looked at her. You did not destroy me because I was nothing, my lady. You destroyed me because you were the only one in this hall who saw what the king had not yet admitted to himself. You aimed at me a year before he ever knew I was there. That is not the carefulness of a woman protecting her pack. That is the carefulness of a woman who has already lost, and knows it. The silence after that was a different silence. I have set bones to the sound of a hall that quiet. Garrick broke first. Garrick, who had never been able to hold a thing in his life, stammering, half confessing, naming her in his panic. And it was over. You could see it cross the hall like light. Lady Astrid stood very straight and very alone while the pack's faces turned, one by one, from me to her, and the king came down off the dais at last, not to rescue me, but to stand beside me, his shoulder a pace from mine, and let the whole pack see where he chose to stand. Lady Astrid of the Eastern Pack, he said, and his voice filled the hall to the rafters, you bought the humiliation of one of my people, and called it love of this pack. You are stripped of your place at this court, and put to the Eastern Road by midday. And if your pack would quarrel with that, they may bring the quarrel to me. He let that sit, and let every wolf here mark it, the next one who throws away the weak for sport answers to me personally. Marin is under my word. She always was. It was the boy who undid me, though, in the middle of all of it, into the great quiet. Leaf tugged my hand and said, not quietly, children are never quiet. Does this mean you stay forever now? And I knelt down to his level, with the whole pack watching and the king watching, and my eyes stinging in a way I would later blame on the torch smoke. And I said, yes, I think it does. The kiss came later, and it was not a thing of mouths or heat. It came weeks after. In the doorway of the nursery he always left open, when the boy was finally asleep, and the king crossed the 2 careful paces he had held between us for a whole season, and rested his brow against mine, and let me feel, all at once, the warmth he had buried so deep that even his grief had not been able to reach it. Something I had been holding shut for 23 guarded years came quietly open. He did not say much. Grieving men rarely do. But he said, his wolf knew you before I would let myself. I am only catching up. And that was enough. That was everything. The fallout was not tidy. Garrick was put to the road behind his patron, disgraced, his bought future gone to ash, and good riddance. Astrid's pack to the east grumbled, and there were tense envoys through the winter, and the king rode out twice to make the border hold, and I did not sleep well the nights he was gone. The court that had whispered against me had to unlearn the whispering, and some did it gracelessly. A Luna who comes up from the stillroom learns fast which bows are real, but I had walked the length of that hall once with a hole torn in my chest and my chin up, and after a woman has done that, the small weather of a few proud wolves cannot move her much. 6 months later, the snows came back, and the king had a new chair made. I want to be careful telling you this part, because it is the part I hold closest. He did not give me the grey chair. The grey chair was hers, his first Luna's, the woman whose cold hand I had held when I was 16. And some seats are not meant to be filled by anyone else, and we both knew it. So instead, the grey chair stayed where it had always stood, draped and honoured, and beside it, on the king's other hand, there was now a new chair, plain and good and made of pale pine, and that one was mine. I sat in it the first night with Leaf half asleep against my side, and the most feared wolf in the north reaching over. Without seeming to notice he did it, to rest his hand a moment on the arm of the grey chair the way he always had, and then, after, to rest it over mine. A letter came that morning from the southern village where I was born, from a woman who had known me when I was nobody's anything, wanting to know if the wild story was true, that the healer Garrick threw away in the autumn was Luna of the Iron Territories now, with a king and a boy, and a chair of her own at the high table. I read it twice, in the pale morning light, with a grieving man who had stopped grieving asleep in the chair beside me, and his son's hand fisted in my sleeve. And I thought about the night I walked out of that hall, certain I had nowhere to go, and no one to turn to. I had been so sure that was the end of me. It turned out to be the first time in my life I had ever walked toward something instead of away. So tell me, that night at the back of the hall, when the king watched my own mate throw me away and said nothing, and let me walk out into the cold alone, do you think he already knew, somewhere under all that grief, who I was? Or did his wolf recognize me a full season before his heart would let him? I've sat in my pale pine chair and turned it over all winter, and I still can't say for certain. Tell me your theory below. I read every one. And if you want to know what came down the eastern road when the snows melted, and what a 4-year-old boy did when Astrid's pack came asking after her, comment the chair and stay close. Follow Moon and Iron. Share this with someone who needs reminding that walking out with your chin up is not the same as having nowhere to go, and I'll tell you what happened the next time someone underestimated the healer they threw away. Her side of the story. Pull up a chair. There's room now.